Green agenda collapses? EU snubs Carney's carbon plan with massive industry exemption. Mark Carney, who recently became Canada's new Prime Minister after his Liberal Party won the April 2025 snap election, entered office promising a refined approach to climate policy. One of his flagship reforms was to scrap the widely criticized consumer-facing carbon tax. But while that announcement was expected, his next step raised eyebrows, introducing a more aggressive industrial carbon pricing system. Carney framed it as a way to keep Canada competitive in global trade, claiming the European Union would require strict carbon policies from its partners. But just days into his term, Carney's central argument was blindsided by an unexpected development. The EU itself moved to refund its own industries for carbon taxes using funds from its Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM. In one stroke, Europe contradicted the very strategy Carney had just sold to Canadians. This move wasn't just administrative, it was symbolic. It marked a shift in global climate politics, where economic resilience suddenly took precedence over rigid environmental orthodoxy. The EU's decision to shield nearly 90% of its key industrial sectors from the financial pain of carbon taxes sent shockwaves through environmental policy circles. And for Canada, which had been positioning its climate plan on the assumption that industrial pricing was globally harmonized, it exposed a policy misfire. Carney's approach now looks out of sync with his supposed allies. Canadian opposition parties and business groups wasted no time reacting. Critics accused Carney of pushing a narrative that was never based on grounded economics. The fact that Europe, once a champion of carbon discipline, is now insulating its industrial base was interpreted as validation for long-standing concerns. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet delivered a biting critique in Parliament, sarcastically suggesting that Carney must have borrowed Justin Trudeau's spine, insinuating the new Prime Minister lacked the political courage to defend Canadian economic interests. The implication was clear. Carney's strategy was more about optics than substance, and now the mask had slipped. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, sensing an opportunity to reignite his Axe the Tax movement, zeroed in on the contradiction. He argued that by taxing Canadian industry while other nations backtracked, the Liberals were creating a dangerous imbalance. According to Poilievre, businesses could begin pulling out of Canada to relocate to jurisdictions with less punishing regulatory environments. He portrayed Carney's plan not as a climate strategy, but as a slow-rolling economic threat. Jobs, investment, and industrial stability were all at stake, and the warning signs were blinking red. This wasn't just political grandstanding. Canada's manufacturing-heavy regions, Ontario, Alberta, parts of Quebec, have long depended on sectors like steel, aluminum, and cement. These industries now find themselves in the awkward position of being held to a stricter standard than their international competitors. The EU's exemptions offer relief and competitiveness. Canada's model still offers penalties and uncertainty. That gap creates a dangerous incentive: stay and suffer, or leave and survive. The consequences could be devastating for Canada's already fragile industrial base. Observers are also looking at Germany as a cautionary tale. Once considered the industrial engine of Europe, Germany is now wrestling with recession, having lost over 12,000 companies in just 6 months. Their shift toward green energy, while ambitious, led to electricity price surges and unreliable power supplies. Wind and solar, hailed as the clean future, failed to deliver consistent output, forcing the government to return to coal. The result has been job losses, economic stagnation, and growing public dissatisfaction. If Canada follows a similar path without course correction, it may find itself on the same grim trajectory. Carney's defenders argue that the output-based pricing system, OBPS, allows flexibility and can be adjusted to protect emissions-intensive, trade-exposed sectors. But so far, no detailed plan has been presented. Businesses are still waiting for clear signals, relief, rebates, or support. Without them, their long-term investment decisions are at risk. Meanwhile, smaller producers and regional industries feel like collateral damage in a climate strategy that has yet to demonstrate economic sensitivity. Time is not on the government's side. The next fiscal quarter will be critical as manufacturers assess their cost outlook under the new system. If carbon levies continue without targeted relief, the loss of competitiveness could accelerate. Carney has the tools to act. He could recalibrate industrial thresholds, introduce rebates tied to green investment, or establish transition funds for struggling firms. What remains to be seen is whether he has the political will to pivot, especially after campaigning as a climate hawk. Liberal strategists are trying to reframe the issue. They argue that this isn't a retreat from climate leadership but a rebalancing, an attempt to modernize carbon policy to reflect economic realities. Yet critics accuse them of scrambling to adjust only because the EU exposed the flaws in their argument. Meanwhile, Poilievre and Blanchet continue pressing the message that the Liberals are caught flat-footed, pushing a plan that even their supposed partners have now abandoned in practice. At the heart of this issue are thousands of working Canadians who rely on industrial jobs to feed their families. These workers aren't ideologues. They're welders, machine operators, engineers, truck drivers. They don't oppose environmental stewardship. What they oppose is a government that places them at a disadvantage on the global playing field. They want policy that protects both their livelihood and the planet. And, increasingly, they're not seeing that balance from Ottawa. This moment is pivotal for Carney, not just politically but personally. Known as a disciplined and strategic thinker during his years at the Bank of England and Bank of Canada, his leadership now faces a real-world stress test. Will he double down on his carbon pricing orthodoxy? Or will he adapt, acknowledging that the global stage is shifting? The answer may determine whether he stabilizes Canada's economic position or deepens the cracks already appearing in its industrial core. Canada's future may hinge on the decisions made in the coming weeks. Voters, industries, and international partners are all watching. If Carney successfully pivots, by shielding vulnerable sectors without abandoning environmental goals, he could emerge as a flexible, forward-looking leader. If he doesn't, the Liberals could find themselves punished at the ballot box, their green promises turned into a political liability. The green agenda, once a unifying vision, now faces its biggest challenge yet, not from skeptics, but from reality itself.